Hello everyone, Storm1 here. Today we'll be talking about the upper Midwest that could experience multiple severe weather setups over the next couple days, as some of it could be significant. Before we get started this video, if you guys like weather related content, you can subscribe to my channel. We do this every all the time on this channel. Plus, we'll have more updates on these severe weather setups over the next several days, so definitely stay tuned for more updates as well. We're going to start with the watch warning advisory this way. We actually have a tornado watch in effect for parts of southeastern Minnesota and west central Wisconsin. In some surrounding areas, we actually do have some wind advisories out there as well, so it'll be windy in some of those areas. You also notice here from parts of the desert southwest, even into parts of the Southern Plains, we got fire weather problems out there. And temperatures are very mild out there too. I believe yesterday Texas had their earliest 100-degree temperature reading on record, or at least in recorded history. Anyway, so there's some serious heat going on down there, but you also have a combination of some strong winds and very low humidity, and that's going to lead to some fire weather issues out there. So if you do live in the parts of the Four Corner states, several points, even in the parts of the desert Southwest, definitely do not burn anything out there, as conditions will be favorable for some fire weather problems. But you know what, for the rest of the country, generally mostly quiet. Here's the SPC outlook here for today. We got the enhanced risk for severe weather for southeastern Minnesota into west central Wisconsin. That's where we have the tornado watch located. There's a 10% risk area for tornadoes. And also, I cannot rule out a strong tornado or two because the wind shear values are actually pretty elevated out there right now. Damage winds will be possible. There's also the possibility for some hail. Something that could be significant out there as well. Day two, which is tomorrow, we got two slight risk areas. We got one up in the southern Wisconsin, and there's another one for southwestern Texas. And we're going to make this real quick here. Since we're not going to talk much about southwestern Texas, I'm going to make this real quick here. So for southwestern Texas, if you do look at the tornado risk, it's a pretty low tornado risk. So wind shear values in southwestern Texas will be very low. So the tornado risk overall will be slim to none. But with the elevated instability values, which some of it can be pretty high, along with strong lap rates, conditions will be favorable for damaging winds and large hail. Some of it can be significant as well. So, given that said here, conditions will be favorable for severe weather, but not really in much a way for tornadoes out there as well. Wind shear values will be pretty low for some of those areas down there. We'll also talk more about this risk area here up north a little bit later in the video. Then on day three, which is Wednesday, we got a slight risk for severe weather for eastern South Dakota, southeastern North Dakota, into parts of central Minnesota. And we got a March risk that extends pretty much through parts of the western plains out there, eastern New Mexico, western Texas, and then extends all the way up into parts of the Dakotas as well. So we got a pretty broad March risk area, and there's no hatched area out there at this time. And then you get to day four, which is Thursday. We got the enhanced risk for severe weather for parts of the eastern Dakotas into northwestern Minnesota. And what's interesting is that for these particular areas within that 30% risk area, it's actually the first time they've ever been in a 30% risk area on a 4 to 8 day outlook during the month of May. So that's very interesting up there as well. And the risk up there, what the models are suggesting, it's a little bit concerning up there. So that's definitely a day to really keep an eye on. 5, 6, 7, and 8 is currently predictably too low at this time. Also, earlier this morning in the parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, we had some big time hailstorms out there. I think we had some reports potentially with baseball size hail out there. I do know that there was a severe thunderstorm warning out there. It was a PDS severe thunderstorm warning in the southwestern part of Minnesota that was warned for softball size hail. So there were some serious hailstorms out there. You can see here there were 66 hail reports. 7 of those were significant out there. There were some damage winds out there. There was 5 wind damage reports out there. But good news is there were 0 tornado reports out there as well. Actually, I did not have it set on a filter. So on the filter reports, there were actually 41 hail reports and 4 wind reports. But regardless, we had a lot of hail with some of the storms out there this morning. But for some areas, especially around the Minneapolis area, we got a return risk for severe weather later today. And that's not going to be the only day. Could continue over the next several days out there. So let's check out the current environment here. We're going to start off by surface-based Cape. And you can see here, numbers are pretty elevated out there. I mean, check out northern Missouri and the Iowa. Luckily, we're not expecting severe weather in those areas today, where we have instability values up to 5,000 joules per kilogram. Well, actually, some areas could experience some severe weather, at least in the northern part of Iowa. But anyway, there's a lot of instability out there regardless. And that does extend into parts of southern Minnesota, at least values up to 3,000 anyway. It does extend all the way up into central Minnesota, and that's where we do have some thunderstorms currently all going out there, too. Mixed layer Cape is also pretty elevated, too. This could determine the large hail risk, especially the significant hail risk, and we do have some pretty elevated numbers out there. 2,000 to 2,500 joules per kilogram of mixed layer Cape. Downdraft Cape numbers are pretty elevated out there. I consider up over 1,000 joules per kilogram downdraft Cape to be very elevated out there. Really, numbers over 800 or even above 700 can be favorable for damage winds as well. So it's definitely some pretty elevated numbers out there. Low lap rates are not very impressive where the storms are at, but some of those values are beginning to get closer to some of the storms out there too. Bulk shear values are pretty elevated, up to 80 knots of bulk shear. It's quite strong. And then you talk about story to felicity values, the effective layer is up to as high as 400, which is quite high. And here are some of the other ones too. And this is a new product here from the surface to, I assume, 500 meters or 500 millibars. Values are also very elevated. And with values like these here, conditions can be favorable not only for tornadoes, but also for strong tornadoes too. So we definitely need to keep an eye on these storms later today as well, which, if we check out the hodograph map, check out some of these hodographs. I mean, some large curves to these hodographs out here. So I am a little bit concerned about the tornado risk today. So if you do live, especially in the enhanced risk area and even in the slight risk area, definitely need to be weather aware later today because conditions could be favorable not only for damaged winds and large hail, conditions could also be favorable for tornadoes. So some of those can be strong as well. Which, if we do check out the significant tornado parameters using the fixed layer, we got values as high as a 4 out there. So it really values over 2 is considered conditions can be favorable for strong tornadoes. So we definitely need to keep an eye on these supercells as the day goes on today over parts of central Minnesota. Here's the latest Hardball 19Z run, and really it's really been initiating convection way too late, earlier than what the model's projected, and that's very typical from the HER model. But regardless here, even with late initiation, you still got some pretty good storms out there too. And really, all hazards are possible for those storms, including the potential for strong tornadoes. So we definitely really need to keep an eye on the storms as the day goes on today. So let's go on and move on tomorrow. We already talked about southwestern Texas earlier in the video. Let's talk about Wisconsin's threat, because this could be a little bit of an interesting setup. And we're going to begin around 17:00 Tuesday, so about midday. And pay attention to these areas up here. This is the area I'm focused on. And there's a lot of shower thunderstorm development out there. But some of these could become into an organized cluster of thunderstorms, which you can see right here. I talked about this last night on Twitter, where the European model was very consistent. I'm talking about being extremely consistent of showing a mesoscale convective system, or in other words, a cluster of thunderstorms moving through parts of the Midwest, especially through parts of Wisconsin and Illinois, even into parts of Missouri as well. It's been very consistent. It's been showing that same type of signal over the past several days, which we'll check out the latest European model here in a little bit, but you can see here from the HER model's perspective, it shows that very similar cluster thunderstorms. And you can see how it moves across parts of Wisconsin and eventually into northern Illinois, and eventually it really fizzles out when it gets into central Illinois. But it really depends on the capping situation in the wind shear. There will be a lot of instability in place regardless, but wind shear and capping will still be a good will still be a question. Which if you do check out surface based cape at around the same time frame here, its speed values are very low. At least around this time frame here from the Hermal anyway. But sometimes the Hermal does have a tendency to underestimate the cape. And also got a feeling at the same time that it's also good to underestimate the speeds because sometimes Mexico convective systems can move very quickly. So it has it dying out here in central Illinois by like 11Z. If you were to check out the European model, it goes a little bit faster. And I think that's a more accurate perspective because sometimes the Hermo underestimates the speeds of cluster thunderstorms. It did that very similar way when we had that model risk over parts of Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and southeastern Missouri back in April, where we had a big cluster thunderstorms to roll through parts of Kentucky. That's when we had that tornado in the southeast side of Louisville. It was running much faster than the Her model. So it would not surprise me if the Her model is running a little bit too slow with the system. But here's the European model's perspective here. And if the lightning strikes are bolded like this, if they're bolded, that's the indication there's a lot of lightning with these storms, or the lightning density is quite high. If you check out the lightning density, especially when you get into those pink shades, that's an indication that there is a lot of lightning with these storms. And if we go to 8 p.m., and I believe this is in Central Time if I'm correct on this model here, or at least the time here. I don't know if it's Central Time or Eastern Time, what it says down here. But anyway, you see here's your big cluster thunderstorms moving through parts of central and eastern Wisconsin. Here it kind of affects the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. Here's the lightning density. Now you're starting to see some of those pink colors begin to show up out there. And that's very typical for Mexico convective systems to produce. They typically produce a lot of lightning. And now you're starting to see your MCS move into parts of the northeastern part of Illinois, getting closer to Chicago. And you also notice here, then again, the lightning density. You got some pink colors showing up. That's very typical for Mexico convective systems to have. If you move on to 5 o'clock, so about 5 a.m., now it's in the central part of Illinois. Even some parts of the MCS could get into parts of northern Indiana. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty as you move off to the east here. If we back this up a little bit to about 2 a.m., if we check out the instability from the European model, I mean, check this out here. 2 a.m. Now, sometimes the European model has a tendency to overestimate the instability a little bit, but there's a lot of instability out there, especially as you get farther back to the west. Those are instability values up to or around 4,000 joules per kilogram. So there's a lot of instability. However, if I were to check out the 850 millibar winds, there's not a whole lot of wind shear out there, as you can see here. So there's some uncertainty with wind shear and also how the cap is going to go, because I could determine how long this big cluster thunderstorms could last. Typically with Mexico convective systems, they typically produce widespread damage winds. And there's also that possibility for a quick spin of tornado or two, but that all kind of depends on the wind shear values. So if we move to about 8 o'clock in the morning, here's your big cluster thunderstorms moving into around the St. Louis area. And then again, here's your lightning density. Now it's beginning to back off. That's a show that it is weakening at that point. As when eventually by 12 o'clock, should be gone by that point. So, given that said, and like I said earlier, the European model has been extremely consistent. So if a model were to be very consistent like that, I mean, it's something you don't see very often. However, at the same time, models do not handle MCS storms very well. And honestly, in my opinion here, if one were to develop, I would kind of follow on the European model, especially given by its very consistent signal. And again, I talked about this last night, which here's the map I made last night here. And it seems like it's going all right. Maybe too far to the east here, but you never know. Mexico convective systems can be quite unpredictable. So really in this red shade here, a Mexico convective system is still possible. The timing's Tuesday afternoon into early Wednesday morning, and overall the confidence is going to stay low until we kind of get into a better agreement. Like the HER model, it had a weakening in the central part of Illinois, but then again, I think it's moving way too slow here. But regardless, I think the better confidence area is going to be in this pink shade, roughly in this area right in here. And this is the area I will watch for that potential for a Mexico convective system. So if you do live in those areas, definitely keep an eye on some of the forecasts over the later tonight into tomorrow, because things could get a little interesting tomorrow night over some of these areas as well. Now the main focus for severe weather on Wednesday shifts back to the west over parts of South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, maybe in the parts of Iowa. This is the Supercell Composite for the NAM. There's some pretty elevated numbers out there. Highs in 18 out there. Let's try not to get a aggressive sounding here, which typically with aggressive soundings are not very accurate. But here you go. It does show some slight capping issues. That's kind of one problem here. It's also got a lot of dry air, so there is some limiting factors here. But check out some of the other ingredients though. There is pretty impressive wind direction of height here. Even though the winds in the upper levels won't be strong, that's still a pretty good wind direction of height here. Also, rate of velocity values are very elevated, between 300 and 500. So there are some elevated values. There's a good hodograph. And check out the instability. Surface base is 4600. Mixed layer cape, I saw a sounding earlier today having up as high as 5200. And that's mixed layer cape. And those are numbers in the mixed layer that you don't see very often. And usually that can mean big time hailstorms out there. And I think that's going to be the main concern here. But conditions will also be favorable for damage winds. Downdraft cape is up to 1000. And the tornado threat will also be pretty elevated too, given by the wind direction of height, good hodograph, and rate of velocity values are very elevated. It all kind of depends on if thunderstorms can develop in this environment though, because forcing might be on the weaker side of things out there. So that's another thing to watch for too. So then again, if a thunderstorm were to develop in this environment, conditions will be favorable for all hazards, and includes significant hail, damage winds, and tornadoes. Some of those could potentially be strong as well. So we also got to kind of pay attention to this warm front here as well. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. That warm front will slowly move north as we do get into the overnight hours as well. And then you had that enhanced risk that the SPC has highlighted by around peak time heating on Thursday. You can see here there are some pretty elevated values again out there. But there are some uncertainties here. I think the NAMO is a little bit fast with it, because if we check out the GFS, it's actually further back to the west. The front from the GFS is back as far west as the central Dakotas, and the NAMO is kind of as far west as about around the eastern Dakotas. And this is at the same time frame, 21Z. So there are some speed differences here of how fast the system could move. And the GFS has the progression by, so I think the NAM could be moving a tad bit faster, so it might be a little bit too far east with everything here. But regardless of the speed here, both models do suggest a pretty good environment for supercells. If I were to get a sounding here, like in the northeast central part of Minnesota for the NAM, and at the same time we'll get a sounding here from the GFS in the northwest central part of Minnesota from the GFS. Here's just where you get to some issues. From the NAMO's perspective here, there's actually a cap in place, at least as you get in this northern portion anyway. There's a lot of instability in place though, I will say that. There's a lot of instability. Wind shear values also do look good too. So if the cap were to break, conditions can be favorable for damage winds, large hail, and even tornadoes. One or two of those could be strong. It all depends on if the storms can break that cap. And here's the GFS model. It shows a very similar situation here. However, it's weaker in the wind shear values, but it's also weaker with the cap too in the dry air. So there are some differences here, which I know these are two different locations here, but if the Namor were to be slower, this will be kind of a similar sounding placement, if you know what I mean. So there are some differences here, there are some absurdities here, but regardless here, both soundings do show a pretty volatile atmosphere out there. If we also get a sounding here closer to the cold front, so the GFS, we'll get there, and we'll get one in northwest central part of Iowa for the NAM. If we check out the GFS model first, there is some slight contamination on the sounding here. It's also very weak on the wind shear in that environment too, which is a little odd. Looks like both of these settings here, at least along the cold front, wind shear looks to be weaker along the cold front. But if we check this out in a little bit of a different view here on wind shear, that's 850 millibar winds. You can see here as we get closer to the front here, there's not a whole lot of wind shear out there. You can see our wind direction here. It's a little bit different than what it is further to the east. Which is to get further to the east here, the Lova jet is on the stronger side. Up to around 50 knots is pretty good for a Lova jet. If you were to compare that to the GFS, you know what, there are some similarities out there, but it's a tad bit weaker for the GFS model, but that can still support some decent wind shear values out there as well. Plus, the GFS, it's not really a good high resolution model out there, so it can underestimate the Lova jet in some cases. But then again here, both models do show a pretty decent setup here. If we were to check out surface-based cape and also sign in too, this is the NAM. You can see here, deep in the warm sector, there are some sign-in values out there, and that can help limit the severe weather potential. However, if you get closer to the warm front, there are some sign-in values that are about around 0. So there are some breaks here with the cap here, and that's the areas I will watch for. And if we check out the GFS, you know what? It's not as strong with the cap here as the GFS or as the NAM is what I meant to say. But regardless here, both models show a pretty good environment here for severe weather, and all hazards will be possible as well. So we definitely need to keep an eye on some of these areas here very closely here over the next couple days for Thursday as well. And this front here will continue to move slowly to the east here, and that could bring in more severe weather setups too as well as we get deeper into the week. But anyways, guys, that's all for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Guys, like this video, hit that like button. If you do like my channel, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. If you guys have questions about this, put the comment section down below. I'll answer guys' questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye and have a good day.